Pete, we got a 2-week break for the Olympics. Who really needs this 2 weeks to do a reset?
Kyle Busch would be the top of the list.
The obvious answer.
Yeah, I mean, and it's funny because obviously Kyle is in one of those years right now where things just don't go right for him. It's funny. He ran a super late model race up at Oxford Plains over the 4th of July weekend, and he was running fourth. And even that day in that race car, things went bad for him. So it's just one of those years for Kyle Busch. I think he for sure will take these 2 weeks. I think Richard Childress Racing will take these 2 weeks and hopefully reset. I mean, he's at a point where he's going to have to win to make the playoffs. We know what's on the line. That streak of him winning a Cup race, and every year he's been in the Cup Series, that's on the line as well. So I think we all agree, Kyle Busch and Richard Childress Racing and that A-team, they need to take 2 weeks away and come back there for the stretch after the Olympic break and try to race their way into the playoffs.
Come back in, give each other a big hug, and say, all right.
We're back at it. We missed you guys. Let's do this. I mean, listen, Kyle's only path to the playoffs is to win. So that when he comes back, that's the focus, right? My pick would be Ross Chastain, just because Ross is in a position that I don't think he thought he was going to be in. Like, you look at his season, had a lot of speed this year, but they just have not had the finishes correspondent. Nashville, running second, gets wrecked. They've running second at Texas earlier this year, gets wrecked. Having a decent day at Pocono, strategy goes their way. They're going to have a good run there. Ends up in the wall. All of a sudden, you look at it and they're like, "Whoa, they're right on that cut line. This team is too good. That driver's too good to be in that position." They already have Daniel Suarez in the playoffs, so they don't have to worry about, hey, we prioritizing one guy over the other. Right now, the focus should be on Chastain, getting him in the playoffs securely. He's got the speed. They just haven't the results to show for it. You've got to figure out how to get that last little bit to get over the hump a little bit. And if somebody pops up and wins a race, whether it's a Bubba Wallace or Kyle Busch or whomever, Chastain could be out.
Well, and that's the thing. I mean, he's 27 points to the good right now. Chris Busch is 44 points to the good, and Ty Gibbs 67 points to the good. Pete, you talked about it earlier. You both talked about it. Yeah, somebody else pops up and wins one of these races. One of these guys, like, say, a Bubba Wallace, a Chase Briscoe, a Todd Gilliland, who's been running well, Josh Berry. One of these guys pops up and wins a race all of a sudden, and that line moves.
Yeah, I mean, like when Cindric wound up winning at Gateway after what happened to Ryan Blaney, it's kind of the same idea. I still think there's really one chance left for that variable, and that's Daytona, not the regular season finale, for that to happen. I think it can happen there. But I mean, it's funny because, Jordan brought up Chastain. It feels like Chastain and Kyle Busch have a little bit of a commonality in they're obviously having bad luck, but Ross has been showing up and qualifying in the middle of the pack, and the speed isn't there. And we all know when you're in the middle of the pack, you can be back there and things can go wrong, and you're kind of making everything twice as hard to get to the front. So I think in his case, finding some speed there on Saturdays, interesting on Saturday this week at Indianapolis, they got the extra 50 minutes of practice because we've not had this car on that racetrack. Those are the kinds of things that I think can help those kinds of teams. So they're not so much in the hole when you start the race and get a little closer to the front. But, again, somebody rises up here in these last handful of races, and then we're talking about something completely different. And I do think Bubba Wallace is on that short list of being able to do that here down the stretch.
Can you sit in the middle of a watermelon field and just kind of meditate?
I have no idea. I know you can meditate with a watermelon margarita, so that's gonna help.
that would work.
Yeah.
Well, that's it. Bubba Wallace is another guy. I mean, now he's at the other side of the cut line, 27 points on the negative side of the cut line. Below him, you've got Chase Briscoe's minus 75. I think Chase is definitely in the must-win situation. Bubba just seems like a guy right now that's not driving with any confidence. You get that feeling, Jordan?
Yeah, I mean, they just have been off. And I know they did a really impressive job at Pocono, starting off. They didn't qualify well. They had a really bad first stage, and then they rebounded and left there with the 10th place finish, which I thought was huge just mentally. This team needs a reset as well. They haven't had speed. They haven't got a lot of stage points this year. They haven't looked, especially compared to Tyler Reddick. You compare the two teammates. Tyler's up there running in the top 10 on a regular basis. Could have won, 2 or 3 races over the last 5-6 races, and is much more consistent and is doing a much better job. And frankly, almost leading the regular season standings. Bubba's in a spot now where he's almost in a must-win, but not quite. And the results aren't there. He hasn't won a points race in over a year. Like, there's questions about this. Like, the longer you go, kind of just being okay while your teammate is excelling, that's only going to amplify the pressure on you right now, and that's not a good situation for this team.
How do you feel about Bubba right now, Pete? Do you feel like he's lacking on some confidence?
I do, but it's funny. We had Booty Barker on the morning drive this week, and he said he felt like they feel they can still point their way in. They took a big chunk out of the points this past week at Pocono with the run they had, so he's not giving up that side of it. But I do think that it's different. There were opportunities, and that's the other thing. Bubba, as we know, wears his heart on his sleeve. There were opportunities earlier this year. We kept talking about the 1.5 mile program, how good 2311 was there, and those intermediate tracks that they kind of let slip through their fingers, and so he's trying to play a little catch up. I think the run this past week, starting 29th and getting into the top 10, not a win, I think that helped that confidence, but I think he needs a little bit more. And again, I still think, to Booty's point, I'm not so sure they can point their way in. I think they got to find victory lane here in order to get that 23 car into the playoffs.
This is going to be an interesting week because I think going into a 2-week break, you always like to hear guys talk about having momentum. And in other sports, and we've all covered other sports, you hear guys talk about going into a bye week, wanting to have that feel good going into a bye week. And I think this is going to be the same type thing for these drivers going into a 2-week break. If you can get that positive boost going forward, that's a lot better position to be in than going into a 2-week break, shaking your head going, what in the world is going on with us? And how are we going to reset before this is all said and done?